Welcome to Hidden Chapters. What's missing here matters more than what's present. Let's begin. The last transmission wasn't a call for help. It was a status update that shouldn't have existed. Then the fire team never checked in again. And the silence that followed was deliberate. The last message came through clean. No static. No urgency. Just a calm voice reporting position, movement, and intent, the kind of transmission you hear 100 times a day and forget 5 minutes later. That's why it stood out. Fire Team Bravo holding overwatch. Village ahead appears clear. No contact. Routine. Professional. Final. After that, nothing. At first, no one reacted. Radios go quiet in the mountains all the time. Terrain blocks signal. Weather bends sound. Silence, by itself, isn't evidence of trouble. But time kept moving. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The Allied element clearing the village reported no resistance. No sightings. No civilians. They described it as evacuated, recently, but cleanly. Doors closed. Cooking fires cold. No panic. That didn't fit. Villages under pressure don't empty politely. They leave traces, broken things, rushed decisions, unfinished lives. This one looked prepared. I requested a comms check with Fire Team Bravo. Nothing. Command told us to hold position. Standard procedure. Don't advance into uncertainty. Let the clearing element finish. Let signals re-establish. But something about that last transmission stayed with me. Not what was said, how it was said. Too calm. Too complete. Like it was meant to close a loop. I tried a different frequency. Still nothing. I checked the terrain through optics. The ridgeline where Bravo was positioned should have been visible. It wasn't empty, but it wasn't active either. No movement. No heat signatures. Just stillness where there should have been noise. The clearing element reached the center of the village and confirmed again, no contact, no resistance. That was the moment I knew holding position wasn't neutral. It was a choice. I reported what I was seeing. The absence, the timing, the way silence was settling instead of lifting. The response was immediate and careful. Maintain position, command repeated. We'll assess. Assessment takes time. Fire teams don't have it. I waited another minute. Then another. Nothing changed. I told my element to prepare to move. Not fast. Not loud. Just enough to see what the silence was hiding. As we advanced along the narrow approach, the terrain tightened around us, rock walls, switchbacks, blind corners. Perfect ground for someone who knew how to disappear. Halfway up the slope, I saw the first sign. Not a body. A spent casing. Fresh. Cleaned of fingerprints. Placed where someone wanted it found, not dropped, not fired in panic. A message. The fire team hadn't vanished. They'd been removed. And whatever had done it was still close enough to be watching. We slowed immediately. Not because we were afraid, but because speed would give the terrain permission to betray us. The path narrowed into a series of switchbacks cut into rock, each turn offering a perfect angle for observation. If someone was still watching, they had elevation, concealment, and patience. Those 3 beat numbers every time. I marked the casing's position mentally and kept moving. No one touched it. Evidence only matters if you expect someone else to investigate later. Right now, it was just confirmation. We reached Bravo's last reported grid without hearing a sound. That was wrong. A fire team holding overwatch leaves noise behind, boots shifting, gear adjusting, whispered checks. Even disciplined silence has texture. This place had none. It felt abandoned too deliberately, like a room staged after something happened in it. Their position was intact. Rucks leaned where they should have been. A pack of batteries sat half open. A radio handset rested on a rock, powered on, volume down. No damage. No blood. No drag marks. Nothing that explained absence. I keyed my mic and called their call sign again, more out of principle than hope. Static answered, but not dead static. A brief distortion, like someone touching the line and letting go. Enough to tell me the radios hadn't failed. Someone had quieted them. I ordered my element to spread just enough to watch angles without breaking cohesion. The ground forced us into a staggered line, each man responsible for a slice of space that could turn hostile without warning. That's when the first shot came. Not at us. Above us. A crack that snapped off the rock face and vanished into air, precise enough to be intentional, distant enough to be untouchable. A signal, not an attack. I raised a fist. Everyone froze. Smoke would give away position. Movement would confirm targets. Whoever fired that round wanted to see what we'd do. So we did nothing. Second stretched. Then another shot, closer this time, striking stone where it would fragment but not wound. Controlled. Disciplined. Someone testing reactions the way professionals do. They knew we weren't the clearing element. They knew we'd come looking. I shifted us laterally, using shadow and contour, never breaking line of sight between teammates. The ground punished mistakes immediately, loose gravel, exposed crossings, angles that looked safe until you imagined them from above. We reached a narrow cut where the trail dipped and rose again. As we crossed, the ambush finally revealed itself. Fire erupted from positions we'd already scanned. Not heavy. Not panicked. Short, accurate bursts designed to pin without exposing shooters. The enemy stayed invisible, moving between shots, letting the terrain speak for them. We returned fire where we could, not to hit, to create space. Smoke followed, drifting just enough to blur elevation without advertising direction. I pushed us forward in bounds, each movement deliberate, rehearsed, ugly. This wasn't a fight meant to be won quickly. It was a message. You weren't supposed to come. As we broke contact and pressed uphill, I understood what had happened to Fire Team Bravo. They hadn't been overwhelmed. They'd been absorbed. Taken apart quietly by someone who knew exactly how much force to apply to leave no trace worth recording. And now, we were standing in the space they'd been erased from, with the same terrain, the same silence, and an enemy who hadn't finished speaking yet. The firing stopped as suddenly as it had started. No withdrawal signal. No last burst. Just silence dropping back into place like it had never been disturbed. That was deliberate. Whoever we were dealing with didn't need to win the ground, they needed to shape our movement. They'd done that. We pushed through the final switchback and reached the outer edge of the village just as the clearing element finished its sweep. From a distance, everything looked calm. Doors closed. Windows intact. No smoke. No damage you could point to and call recent. Up close, it felt wrong. The air held that faint metallic edge that comes after shots have been fired, not fresh, but not gone either. I stepped into the first courtyard and saw marks in the dirt where boots had moved fast, then stopped. Not civilian boots. Not rushed. Controlled. Inside one house, a table was set for a meal that never happened. Cups filled. Food untouched. Chairs pushed back evenly, like people had stood up together. Evacuations don't look like that. We checked room by room, careful not to break the stillness more than necessary. No weapons. No blood. No signs of struggle. But everywhere I looked, I saw absence arranged with intent. Items removed selectively. Corners swept too clean. Places where things should have been disturbed, and weren't. The clearing element reported no contact again, their tone steady but strained now. They were seeing the same thing we were. "Village looks clear," they said. "No civilians. No hostiles. Clear doesn't mean safe." I keyed my mic and asked if anyone had seen Fire Team Bravo pass through. Negative. That narrowed it. Bravo had never reached the village. They'd been taken from Overwatch, removed before they could observe what happened next. In the center of the village, I found the first thing that tied it together. A piece of kit, not military, not civilian. Modified. The kind used when you don't want affiliation traced back cleanly. It was placed openly, almost casually, where we'd be forced to notice it. A breadcrumb. I didn't touch it. I didn't photograph it. I let my eyes do the work and stored the details the way you do when you know evidence will disappear before anyone else sees it. That's when the second phase began. Fire erupted again, closer, sharper, from multiple directions this time. Not a full assault. Pressure. Hurting fire. Shots cracking from rooftops, alleyways, elevation points we hadn't yet occupied. They wanted us inside the village. We moved fast now, using walls and structures for cover, responding with controlled bursts that forced them to reposition without giving us anything solid to engage. The terrain that had protected us earlier now worked against us, tight angles, limited lines of sight, echoes that lied about distance. I felt the shift in tempo. This wasn't about erasing us the way they'd erased Bravo. This was about delay. I realized then what Bravo's disappearance had been for. Not removal. Preparation. They'd been taken so this place could be shaped without witnesses. So the village could be cleared without noise. So by the time anyone official arrived, there would be nothing left to find, only a story that sounded reasonable. The firing paused again, and I used that gap to move to higher ground. From there, I saw something that locked everything into place. Tracks leading away from the village. Not many. Just enough. Whoever had been here hadn't fled. They'd left on purpose. With people. And the people they'd taken weren't random. Fire Team Bravo had never checked in again because they were never meant to. They were the opening move in something designed to disappear cleanly, right before our eyes. The tracks didn't scatter. That was the detail that mattered most. They moved in a tight line, spaced evenly, heading away from the village toward terrain that looked unremarkable on a map but felt deliberate when you stood inside it. No signs of panic. No broken stride. Whoever had been taken, or moved, had done so under control. Including Bravo. I ordered my element to hold position inside the village perimeter. Not because it was safe, because it was predictable. If the enemy was still watching, they'd expect pursuit. Sometimes the fastest way forward is refusing to move at all. I moved alone. Not far. Just enough to confirm what my instincts were already telling me. The path led toward a narrow ravine that cut into the mountains like a wound that never healed properly. Rock walls tight enough to kill radio signal. Switches that forced movement in single file. The kind of place you use when you want to move people without witnesses. Halfway in, I found the second message. A strip of cloth tied around a broken branch. Military fabric. Clean cut. Not torn. Bravo had been here. Alive. They'd marked the path not as a signal for rescue, but as proof they hadn't vanished by accident. Someone had wanted me to know that. Not command. Not the clearing element. Me. The realization hit slowly, then all at once. This wasn't just an ambush. It was a demonstration. Someone had taken a NATO fire team without triggering escalation, without leaving evidence, and without breaking contact discipline, and now they were showing me how easily it could be done. I pulled back before the ravine could swallow me. No heroics. No rash moves. I didn't have the manpower to push through and survive what waited inside. Not yet. Back in the village, the clearing element reported renewed fire from the outskirts, not aimed to kill, just to pin. They were being shaped the same way we had been earlier. This was theater. A controlled environment where someone else decided the pace. I repositioned my element to cover exits instead of chasing shadows. If they wanted to move people through this place, they'd need time. Time meant exposure. Minutes passed. Then one of my men called out quietly. "Sir, we've got movement." Not hostiles. Civilians. A small group emerging from a structure at the far edge of the village, hands visible, movements cautious, faces unreadable. They hadn't fled earlier because they'd been told not to. Used. They stopped when they saw us, fear flickering just long enough to be real before discipline smoothed it out. Someone had coached them. I approached slowly, weapon lowered but ready. Where did they take them? I asked, not specifying who. One of the civilians glanced toward the ravine without turning his head. "Not here," he said. "They said if we waited, we'd be safe." "Who said that?" I asked. He hesitated. "Men who knew how you move," he replied. That answer settled everything. Bravo hadn't been collateral. They'd been leverage. Whoever was running this operation wanted to prove something, not to us, but to the system that would read the report later and find nothing worth acting on. I keyed my mic and gave command the update. Village clear. Civilians present. Signs of contact inconclusive. Every word true. Every word insufficient. As the sun dipped lower and shadows stretched across the stone walls, I understood the shape of the trap we were standing in. The enemy wasn't trying to win. They were trying to disappear. After showing they could take whoever they wanted first. I gave the order no one expected. We held. Every instinct in my body told me to push forward. Fire Team Bravo had been taken less than a kilometer from our position. The tracks were fresh. The ravine was open. This was the window where speed usually mattered more than caution. But this wasn't an escape. It was a design. Whoever had done this wanted pursuit. Wanted us stretched thin in terrain that punished impatience. Every step forward without clarity would give them exactly what they'd prepared for. So we stayed where we were. The village sat between us and the ravine like a pressure point. Civilians remained inside their homes, doors closed but unlocked, moving only when necessary. They weren't prisoners. They weren't free either. They were waiting, just like we were. I repositioned my element to cover approaches instead of chasing shadows. Rooftops. Narrow lanes. Lines of sight that overlapped just enough to create uncertainty for anyone watching. If the enemy wanted to test us again, they'd have to expose themselves. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The radio stayed quiet except for routine checks. No new fire. No movement in the ravine. No attempt to retrieve what they'd taken. That silence felt heavier than contact. It meant they weren't in a hurry. They didn't need to be. I thought about Bravo's last transmission again. Calm. Procedural. Too complete. It wasn't meant to buy time for escape. It was meant to close a chapter before anyone realized it was still open. That meant whatever followed had already been accounted for. As the sun dipped lower, long shadows stretched across the stone walls. Light faded in a way that made distance harder to judge. Perfect conditions for someone who wanted to move unseen, or not move at all. That's when I realized the worst possibility. Bravo might not be nearby anymore. They might have already been moved far enough that pursuit didn't matter. The ravine wasn't a rout. It was a delay. I sent another update to command. Careful phrasing. No accusations. Just observation. The response came back unchanged. QRF en route. Maintain position. I acknowledged and shut the radio off. Sometimes silence is the only way to hear what's actually happening. As night settled over the village, I stood at the edge of the ravine and listened. Not for movement. For intention. And the longer I stood there, the clearer it became. Whatever had taken fire, Team Bravo wasn't improvising. They were already gone. Night changes mountains into something simpler. Fewer shapes. More deception. We kept our footprint tight. No wandering patrols. No unnecessary comms. Just eyes on the approaches and a quiet understanding that we were being watched from angles we couldn't name. Around midnight, my radio clicked once. Not a full transmission. A single pulse that sounded like a mic keying up and releasing. At first I thought it was interference. Wind, terrain, old equipment. But then it happened again, same rhythm, same frequency, 3 seconds apart. That wasn't random. That was someone touching the line on purpose. I signaled my comms guy and he adjusted sensitivity, filtered noise, tried to isolate direction. The pulse didn't get clearer. It didn't need to. It wasn't carrying information. It was confirming something else. That the channel was alive. And if the channel was alive, then Bravo's radio might be alive too, not because they were transmitting, but because someone else was. The pulses continued for another minute, then stopped. Silence returned. I waited. Then, 15 minutes later, it happened again, same frequency, same pattern, but the signal strength shifted slightly, like the source had moved. Radios don't move by themselves. People do. I felt my stomach tighten. Not panic. Recognition. This wasn't a rescue signal. It was too clean. Too minimal. Too controlled. It felt like bait designed for someone disciplined enough to notice and stubborn enough to follow. I didn't move. I marked the time and wrote nothing down. Paper trails are how systems become involved. Right now, the only thing we could trust was what we could personally verify. The pulses returned again at 1:40. Stronger now. Closer. Then they cut out hard, like someone had turned the device off. That was the moment I decided we couldn't wait for daylight. Not because we were chasing them, because they were now shaping us again. They wanted us pinned, controlled, hesitant. Waiting for QRF to arrive so the story could remain procedural. I assembled a 2-man element and moved to the edge of the village without alerting the main force. We kept low, used alleys and walls, moved like shadows in a place that had already been emptied of normal life. At the ravine mouth, the air felt colder, heavier. The kind of cold that settles when rock holds the night like a secret. I listened. Nothing. Then, from deeper inside, one soft click. Not a pulse. A handheld radio being keyed. One time only. I raised my optics and scanned the darkness until my eyes hurt. No movement, no heat, no silhouettes. Whoever was doing this understood concealment better than most. I backed out of the ravine and returned to the village. The signal had done its job. It had forced a decision. If it was Bravo, they were alive, and being moved. If it wasn't, someone wanted me to believe they were. Either way, the result was the same. We were no longer waiting for rescue. We were being invited into a story someone else was writing, one pulse at a time. We moved before the night could reset itself. Not fast. Not loud. Just enough to change the geometry. I left half my element in the village to hold presence and took the rest along a secondary route that paralleled the ravine without entering it. If the signal was meant to pull us in, I wanted to see what reacted when we didn't take the obvious path. The terrain tightened almost immediately. Narrow shelves of rock, scrub that tore at gear, elevation that punished shallow breathing. The kind of ground where every step costs attention. We moved in bounds, covering angles that looked empty until you imagined them occupied. 10 minutes in, the first shot came. Close. Too close to be warning fire. The round snapped past and cracked stone behind us, followed by a short burst from a higher angle. Disciplined fire. Controlled. They weren't trying to pin us, they were testing our spacing. I dropped us into cover and returned fire where the muzzle flash had been, not to hit, but to deny freedom of movement. Smoke followed, hugging the rock face and collapsing visibility just enough to force a decision. That decision came fast. Fire from the opposite side of the path. Then from behind us. Not a trap meant to kill. A trap meant to hold. They wanted us fixed in place, reacting instead of advancing. Whoever was running this understood tempo better than most conventional forces. They knew exactly how much pressure to apply without escalating. We broke contact sideways, using the slope to mask movement, refusing to stay where they'd set the terms. The firing adjusted immediately, tracking us with uncomfortable accuracy. They knew the ground better than us. As we repositioned, I saw it, movement deeper in the ravine. Not rushing. Not hiding. A controlled withdrawal of something heavier than a single person. A stretcher. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I forced back down. Emotion makes mistakes louder. We pushed harder now, accepting exposure to gain angle. Fire intensified but stayed measured. No reckless bursts. No attempts to close distance. They weren't protecting themselves. They were protecting time. One of my men went down hard, not hit, but thrown off balance by fragmentation. We pulled him back, stabilized, kept moving. The enemy fire adjusted again, trying to slow us without committing. That's when it became clear. This wasn't an ambush designed to finish us. It was a screen. Someone was moving Bravo, or what remained of them, deeper into terrain where pursuit would require numbers, daylight, and permission we didn't have. I keyed the radio to call command. Nothing but static. Either the terrain had swallowed the signal, or someone else was holding it down. We fought our way to the edge of the ravine and then it stopped. No final shot. No last burst. Just silence again. The kind that feels intentional. By the time we reached the point where I'd seen movement, there was nothing left but scuffed rock and fading heat signatures moving beyond our reach. They'd delayed us exactly as long as they needed. We pulled back before daylight could trap us in someone else's plan. As we regrouped, I understood the truth we'd been circling all night. Fire Team Bravo wasn't being hunted. They were being handled. And whoever was doing it had no intention of finishing this story where anyone official could read it. Daylight didn't bring clarity. It brought authority. QRF arrived just after first light, vehicles, voices, the familiar weight of numbers. With them came procedures that narrowed options instead of expanding them. Radios filled with updates, checklists, confirmations. The kind of structure that feels like control until you realize it's also a lid. We briefed them exactly once. Positions. Timings. Contact points. The signal pulses. The ambush that never closed. The movement I'd seen deeper in the ravine. I avoided conclusions. Conclusions invite debate. Facts get filed. They listened carefully. Too carefully. Drones went up. Sensors came online. The ravine was scanned inch by inch. From above, it looked clean, no obvious tracks, no visible equipment, no heat where it shouldn't be. The terrain swallowed detail the way it always does when you give it altitude and distance. Ground teams moved in after. Slow. Methodical. Late. They found what we'd already found, nothing that demanded escalation. Scuffed rock. Broken scrub. Evidence that could belong to anyone or no one, depending on who read it. Fire Team Bravo was reclassified. Not captured. Not confirmed Kia. Not missing under hostile action. Status unresolved. That phrase does a lot of work. It closes doors without locking them. It allows movement without commitment. It tells everyone involved that this will not be pushed unless something obvious forces it to be. Nothing obvious remained. I watched command officers confer near the vehicles, their posture relaxed now that uncertainty had been reduced to language. They asked about the civilians. We confirmed they were unharmed. Cooperative. Unaware of anything beyond what they'd been told. Which was true. The village was cleared again, officially this time. Tagged. Logged. Marked as low risk. The ravine was designated unsuitable for further pursuit without additional intel. Additional intel never comes. By mid-morning, we were ordered to prepare to exfil. I looked one last time toward the high ground where Bravo had last checked in. From here, it looked harmless. A good overwatch position. A place any fire team would choose. That was the final insult. The ground itself refused to testify. As we boarded vehicles, someone from QRF asked me quietly whether I believed Bravo was still alive. I thought about the stretcher. The controlled fire. The signal pulses that moved. Yes, I said. For a while. He nodded like that was enough. On the flight out, the operation was already being summarized. Success. No friendly casualties confirmed. No escalation. Objectives achieved. Bravo's absence appeared as a footnote, a complication attributed to terrain, weather, and limited visibility. No corrective action recommended. That was the moment I understood the ending had already been written. Not because no one cared. Because caring required proof. And whoever took Fire Team Bravo had done it in a way that left none behind, except questions that could be safely ignored. By the time we returned to base, the story had hardened. Not officially. Not in writing. But in the way people spoke about it, past tense, settled, filed away. Fire Team Bravo became a reference point instead of a problem. Something discussed briefly, then replaced by the next item on the board. That's how unresolved things survive. I read the draft report late that night. It was clean. Precise. Every movement accounted for, every delay justified by terrain and conditions. The ambush was framed as inconclusive contact. The signal pulses were listed as probable interference. Probable is a powerful word. It ends conversations. There was no space in the document for intention. No room for design. No acknowledgement that someone had controlled the pace, the pressure, and the outcome without ever showing their face. I signed it. Not because I agreed, but because changing it would have required proof I didn't have and couldn't get without tearing open something everyone else wanted sealed. The next day, I was pulled aside quietly. Not reprimanded. Not praised. Repositioned. A temporary assignment away from patrol operations. Training oversight. Analysis. Work that mattered, just not in places where ambiguity could turn into action. That was the cost. Containment without accusation. I accepted it. From that position, I watched how the story spread. How it was retold with fewer details each time. How Bravo's name appeared less often. How absence, when repeated enough, became normal. Weeks passed. Then months. Once, I received an encrypted ping on a channel I hadn't used since the mountains. No message. No coordinates. Just a brief connection that existed long enough to confirm the channel still worked. Then it was gone. I didn't respond. Whatever that was, it wasn't asking for rescue. It was reminding me of something. I thought about the way the ambush had never closed. How the fire had been measured, not panicked. How the enemy had disengaged the moment their objective moved beyond reach. That wasn't desperation. That was discipline. Whoever took Bravo hadn't needed to win. They'd needed to demonstrate capability without forcing response. They'd done that perfectly. The system absorbed it. I absorbed it. But something stayed unsettled. Not grief, uncertainty. The kind that lingers because it doesn't belong to you alone. It belongs to the space between what happened and what was allowed to be acknowledged. Every so often, I catch myself scanning ridgelines that don't matter anymore. Listening to radios for patterns instead of words. Not because I expect Bravo to come back. But because I know the method that took them didn't disappear. It proved itself. And proofs like that don't go unused. Fire Team Bravo never checked in again. Officially, they remain unresolved. Unofficially, they became a lesson no one wanted to teach, about how easy it is to make something vanish when you understand the thresholds that govern attention. The story that stuck was the one that could be filed. The one that couldn't. Was carried quietly by the people who noticed the silence wasn't empty. Years later, the operation surfaced again. Not as a warning. As a reference. I was sitting in the back of a briefing room while a younger officer walked through a slide deck I recognized immediately. Same terrain. Same village. Same Overwatch position marked with a clean symbol that suggested control instead of uncertainty. They called it a contained incident with no confirmed hostile escalation. Fire Team Bravo appeared as a line item. Unresolved. Environmentally compromised. No further action recommended. The language had matured. That's what time does to uncomfortable things, it smooths them until they're safe to repeat. I watched the slide change and waited for something to feel different. It didn't. The room nodded along, satisfied that the story now had edges sharp enough to hold but dull enough not to cut. Afterward, one of the analysts asked if I'd been on that patrol. I said yes. What do you think happened? He asked. I considered the question carefully. I think someone learned what silence buys, I said. He smiled politely, unsure what to do with that, and moved on. Outside, the day was ordinary. Vehicles moving. Radios chirping. The rhythm of a system that believes it has accounted for what matters. I walked past a map board and noticed the area had been reclassified, lower priority now, marked for future monitoring if resources allowed. Resources never allow. That's another lesson. I thought about the pulses on the radio. The stretcher moving deeper into terrain. The civilians who waited because they'd been told to. None of that existed in the record. None of it needed to, for the system to remain functional. But functionality isn't the same as truth. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine a different ending. One where we pushed harder. Forced contact. Created something undeniable. I always reached the same conclusion. Escalation would have closed the story, just not the way you want. Whatever took Bravo wanted to be seen only long enough to be understood by the right people. Then it disappeared, leaving behind a method instead of a mess. That's the part that stays with me. Not the loss. The precision. Fire Team Bravo never checked in again. And somewhere, beyond reports and recommendations, that absence still exists, not as a failure, but as a gap deliberately left open. A reminder. That you don't have to win a fight to change the balance. You just have to show what you can remove. And how quietly you can do it. Hidden Chapters isn't about what people did. It's about what they noticed. Like the video and subscribe. If you want to hear the next chapter. And if you had been present sooner. Would the story have changed?